That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The rain had just stopped falling on the cracked asphalt of Route 17, leaving behind a slick sheen that mirrored the gray sky like a forgotten promise. Jax Harlan pulled his Harley into the gravel lot of Millie's diner, the engine's low rumble fading into the quiet drip of water from the eaves. He killed the ignition, the sudden silence heavy, broken only by the distant hum of semis on the highway. At 42, Jax carried the weight of the Shadow Reaper's patch on his leather vest like an old scar, faded ink on weathered skin. The Brotherhood had been his anchor since Nam chewed him up and spit him out, a loose family of riders who fixed what the world broke, one quiet favor at a time. He swung his leg over the bike, boots crunching on wet stones, and pushed through the diner's door. The bell above jingled softly, a sound too fragile for the place. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and grease, the kind that clung to your clothes like regret. Millie, the owner, a wiry woman in her 60s with hands calloused from years of flipping burgers, nodded from behind the counter without looking up. Her eyes, though, flicked toward him, a silent acknowledgement. Jax had been stopping here for a decade, ever since the divorce that left him with nothing but the road and the club. The diner was empty save for one booth in the corner, where a young woman sat alone, her back to the door. She was maybe 25, dressed in a simple gray hoodie that swallowed her frame, her dark hair falling like a curtain over her face. Jax slid onto a stool at the counter, ordering black coffee in a gravelly voice that hadn't seen much use that day. Millie poured it steaming, the ceramic mug warm against his palms as he wrapped his fingers around it. He stared into the dark liquid, steam rising like ghosts from his past, when the door burst open again. Two men stormed in, clean-cut, suits rumpled from the drive, faces tight with the kind of urgency that came from boardrooms, not back roads. They scanned the room, zeroing in on the woman in the booth. "Elena," the taller one barked, his voice echoing off the Formica walls. She didn't move, didn't even flinch, just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the table as if it held the secrets of the universe. Jax's grip tightened on the mug. He'd seen that stillness before, in the eyes of shell-shocked brothers after a run-in with rivals, or the way his own daughter used to look after her mother's funeral before she grew up and left him behind. The men approached the booth, the shorter one sliding in across from her. "Come on, Elena. Your father's waiting. This isn't you." She lifted her head slightly, enough for Jax to catch a glimpse of her profile. Pale skin, eyes hollowed by something deeper than exhaustion. But no words came, just that unyielding silence. The taller man glanced around, spotting Jax, and his expression hardened. "You know her?" he asked, voice laced with suspicion. Jax met his gaze steadily, the coffee cooling in his hands. "First time seeing her." It wasn't a lie, but something in the way she held herself, shoulders hunched against an invisible weight, tugged at him. The suits pressed on, their whispers turning sharp. The doctor's report said trauma, but this? Your old man's paying top dollar for therapy and you just sit here like a ghost. Millie cleared her throat from the counter, wiping it harder than necessary. "You boys want menus, or you just here to raise hell?" Her tone was even, but Jax knew her well enough to hear the edge, the protectiveness she extended to every lost soul who wandered in. The shorter man ignored her, leaning closer to Elena. "Elena Hargrove, you're coming home. Now." The name hit Jax like a cold wind. Hargrove. As in Victor Hargrove, the billionaire real estate tycoon whose empire sprawled across half the Midwest, buying up land and lives like they were commodities, The papers had buzzed about his daughter 6 months back. A car accident on some private drive, whispers of a breakdown. She'd stopped talking since, retreated into this shell that no amount of money could crack. Elena finally moved, pushing a napkin across the table with a trembling hand. On it, in neat, looping script, "Leave me alone." The man snatched it, crumpling it in his fist. "This ends today." Jack set his mug down, the clink loud in the tension. He didn't know why he spoke. Maybe it was the rain still pattering outside, washing away the grime of the world, or the way her hand shook as she pulled it back. She said, "Leave her alone." His voice was low, steady, the kind that carried the rumble of engines long after they'd stopped. The taller suit turned, sizing him up. The vest, the beard streaked with gray, the faint tattoo peeking from his cuff. "Mind your business, biker. This is family." Jack stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the linoleum. "Looks like she's made her choice." The air thickened, the scent of rain mixing with the sharp tang of fear. Millie hovered nearby, her hand inching toward the phone under the counter. Elena's eyes met Jax's for the first time, wide, searching, a flicker of something alive in the depths of her silence. The men hesitated. The weight of his presence, a lone rider backed by the invisible thread of the Shadow Reapers, enough to make them pause. "This isn't over," the shorter one muttered, tossing a 20 on the table. They backed out, the door slamming behind them, bell jangling like a warning. Jax exhaled, the diner settling into quiet once more. He looked at Elena, who hadn't moved, but her fingers now traced the edge of the table, a small rhythm against the stillness. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, just once, and pushed another napkin toward him. "Thank you." Simple words on paper, but they carried the weight of a voice long silenced. Outside, the sky began to clear, a sliver of sun breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the lot. Jax finished his coffee, the bitterness lingering on his tongue. He didn't know it then, but that moment, the rain-slicked morning, the crumpled napkin, the unspoken plea, would pull him into a storm he couldn't ride away from. The Brotherhood had taught him loyalty ran deeper than blood. But this was something rawer, a crack in the armor of a man who'd long ago stopped believing in second chances. As he stepped out, mounting his bike, the engine roared to life beneath him, vibrating through his bones. Elena watched from the window, her reflection faint against the glass. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a promise of more to come. Jax rode out of the diner lot with the sun's hesitant light warming his back, but the road ahead felt heavier than the rain had left it. Route 17 stretched like a vein through the heart of nowhere, flanked by fields of wilted corn and rusted silos that whispered of better days long gone. The Harley's engine thrummed steady under him, a rhythm that usually cleared his head. But today it couldn't drown out the image of Elena's eyes. Those wide, shadowed pools holding a storm he recognized all too well. He'd seen that look in the mirror after the jungle, after the divorce, after burying dreams under layers of leather and loyalty. Silence like hers wasn't emptiness. It was a fortress built from shattered pieces. He pulled over at the edge of town, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and the first hints of the Shadow Reaper's territory began. The clubhouse was 10 miles out, a squat warehouse converted into a haven of scarred tables, well-worn pool cues, and the faint smell of motor oil that never quite faded. Jax killed the engine and leaned against his bike, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over the contact for Ray, the club's sergeant-at-arms, a bear of a man with a laugh like gravel and eyes that missed nothing. They'd ridden together since the early days, Ray pulling Jax from the bottle after the war, teaching him that brotherhood meant more than shared scars. It meant showing up when the world turned its back. "Jax." Ray's voice rumbled through the line after 2 rings, background noise of clinking tools and low chatter filtering in. "You sound like you swallowed a storm." What's eaten you?" Jax glanced back toward the diner, a speck in the distance now, its neon sign flickering even in daylight. "Ran into something at Millie's. Girl in trouble. Rich folks kind, but she's not talkin'. Suits came for her. Pushy as hell. I stepped in." A pause. Then Ray's chuckle, low and knowing. "You? Playin' night? Thought you were done with that after Lena." The mention of his daughter stung, a fresh cut on an old wound. Lena had been 12 when her mother died, full of fire and questions Jax couldn't answer. She'd grown up resenting the road, the club, the way he chose engines over bedtime stories. Last he'd heard she was in Seattle, building a life far from the dust and danger. "This ain't like that," Jax muttered, rubbing the back of his neck where tension knotted like rope. "Feels off, like she's hiding from more than just Daddy's money." Ray's tone shifted, the humor fading into the steel of a man who'd stared down bar fights and worse. "Hargrove's girl? Saw the headlines? Accident, they said. But whispers say it was no crash. Some kind of family mess. You bringing this to the table?" Jax's boots scuffed the gravel, sending pebbles skittering. The Reapers didn't chase headlines. They fixed the overlooked, the ones society labeled as lost causes. A waitress beaten by her ex, a vet down on his luck. They'd show up with cash or muscle. No questions, no glory. But this, a billionaire's daughter holed up in a roadside dive? It reeked of complications, the kind that drew cops or worse. Still, the napkin with her shaky, "thank you," burned in his memory. A quiet plea that echoed his own unspoken regrets. "Yeah," he said finally. "Meet me at the shop. Bring the others if they're around." The garage came into view as he rode on. A chain-link fence surrounding bays filled with half-rebuilt choppers, the air thick with the tang of welding sparks and fresh rubber. Tommy, the youngest Reaper at 28, was under a 72 Norton, grease smudged across his forehead like war paint. He was ex-Army, lost a leg in Afghanistan, but you'd never know from the way he handled a wrench. Beside him, Maria, Tommy's sister, the club's unofficial medic, patched a cut on old man Harlan's arm. Harlan, no relation but family all the same, had been prospecting since Jax's early days, his hands steady despite the Parkinson's that trembled them now. They gathered as Jax recounted the diner scene, voices overlapping in the dim light of the shop. Ray leaned against a workbench, arms crossed over his chest, the phoenix tattoo on his bicep seeming to flicker in the fluorescent glow. "Suits like that don't back down easy," he said, eyes narrowing. "Hargrove's got pull. Cops on speed dial, private security. You stick your neck out. It could drag us all in." Tommy wiped his hands on a rag, his prosthetic leg clicking softly as he shifted. "But she's just sitting there. Silent? Sounds like what I did after the blast. Docs poked and prodded, but nothing got through till Maria here sat with me. No words, just be in there." His gaze softened, landing on his sister, who nodded quietly. Maria had given up nursing gigs to run with the club, her compassion a quiet force that mended more than bones. Harlan coughed, a wet rattle that silenced the room. "World sees us as monsters," he said, voice thin but steady. "Leather and bikes, think we're all rage and no heart. But we know better. If that girl's broken and no one's fixin' her right, that's our road." His eyes met Jax's, holding the weight of shared history. The runs where they'd pulled brothers from wrecks, the nights burying losses under bottles and brotherhood. Jax felt the pull, that old code stirring like an engine warming up. He'd isolated himself after Lena left, riding solo more than with the pack, convincing himself the world didn't need another fixer. But Elena's silence mirrored his own, words locked away, waiting for the right key. "I go back," he decided, the words tasting like resolve. "Check on her. See if she needs more than a napkin and a stare down." Ray clapped a hand on his shoulder, the gesture solid as oaths. "We got your back, but careful. Storms like this don't break clean." As the sun dipped lower, painting the garage in amber hues, Jax mounted up again. The road back to Millie's felt shorter, the wind carrying the faint scent of impending rain. He didn't notice the black sedan idling at the town's edge, its tinted windows watching his taillight fade into the dusk. Inside the diner, Elena sat in the same booth, a fresh coffee cooling untouched before her. Millie slid a plate of pie her way. Apple, steam rising like a fragile hope. "That Ryder," Millie said softly, wiping her hands on her apron. "He don't talk much, but he listens. World's full of noise. Sometimes silence is the loudest cry." Elena traced the crust with her finger, her reflection in the window catching the last light. For the first time in months, the fortress in her chest cracked, just a hair, letting in the hum of an approaching engine. A sound that promised not thunder, but something steadier. Jax pulled into the lot as twilight settled, the gravel crunching under his boots like whispered secrets. He paused at the door, hand on the knob, the weight of the Brotherhood behind him. The unknown ahead. What he didn't know was how deep her silence ran, or how his unthinkable act would shatter it all. The door to Millie's diner creaked open under Jax's hand, letting in the cool bite of evening air that carried the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The interior glowed with the soft amber of hanging lamps, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Elena was still there, in the same booth, her posture unchanged but for the way her fingers now idly stirred the cooling coffee, the spoon clinking faintly against porcelain like a hesitant heartbeat. Millie looked up from behind the counter, her eyes sharp with unspoken questions, but she said nothing, just nodded toward the pot. Jax waved it off, his boots echoing softly as he approached the booth. He slid into the seat across from her without asking, the vinyl creaking under his weight. Up close, the lines of exhaustion etched her face more clearly, faint shadows under her eyes, a pallor that spoke of nights spent staring at ceilings instead of sleeping. She didn't startle, didn't pull away. Instead, her gaze lifted slowly, meeting his with that same searching intensity from earlier. It was a look that stripped away pretenses, raw and unguarded, the kind Jax had only seen in the eyes of men who'd lost too much in the green hell of Vietnam. "Name's Jax," he said quietly, his voice roughened by the road's dust and years of holding back. He kept his hands visible on the table, palms up, a subtle gesture of peace he'd learned in foxholes where trust was rarer than mercy. "Didn't mean to crowd you this morning. Just didn't sit right, them pushing like that." Elena's lips parted slightly, as if words hovered there, but they dissolved into silence. She reached for a napkin, her movements deliberate, the paper crinkling under her touch. Her handwriting was steadier this time. "Elena, why did you come back?" She slid it across, her eyes never leaving his. A silent challenge wrapped in vulnerability. Jax read it, the words blurring for a second against the steam still rising faintly from her cup. He thought of Ray's warning, the club's code that bound them tighter than any chain. Protect the overlooked, stand where others fled. But this felt personal, like staring into a mirror cracked by his own regrets. "Something about you," he admitted, folding the napkin carefully instead of crumpling it. "Reminds me of folks I've known. Folks who shut down because the world's too loud. The Reapers, we ride for them. Fix what's broken without the fanfare." She tilted her head, a small gesture that caught the light on her hair, turning strands to gold. Outside, the first stars pricked the deepening sky, and the highway hummed with the occasional pass of a truck, its headlights sweeping like searchlights across the windows. Millie busied herself in the kitchen, the sizzle of onions on the grill, a distant underscore to their quiet standoff. Jax leaned back, giving her space, his mind replaying the suits' faces, entitled, unyielding, the kind of men who'd buy silence with checkbooks, but never understand it. "What are reapers?" she wrote next, quicker now, the pen scratching like a whisper. He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Brothers, riders like me. We lost too much to wars and roads, so we build what we can. Help where it counts. No one's beyond fixing, Elena. Not even the quiet ones." Her hand paused midair, the napkin half pulled back, and for a moment, her breath hitched. A soft, almost inaudible catch that hung in the air like smoke. Jax felt it in his chest. That echo of his own buried grief. The way he'd gone silent after Lena's mother died, words failing him until the club dragged him back to life with rough hands and shared silences. He reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a worn photo, creased and faded, showing a younger him with a girl on a swing, her laughter frozen in time. "My daughter," he said, sliding it toward her. "Lost her mom young. She stopped talking to me much after. Blamed the road. Maybe she's right." Elena's fingers brushed the edge of the photo, tracing the lines of Lena's smile. Her eyes softened, the fortress cracking wider, and she nodded, slow and deliberate. Then, another napkin. "Mine too. But not dead. Worse." The words were jagged, the ink pressing harder into the paper, as if the admission carried physical weight. Jax's throat tightened, the diner's warmth suddenly stifling. He knew that worse. The living ghosts that haunted deeper than graves. Whispers from the club about Hargrove's world. Private jets and polished lies, where accidents hid uglier truths. "You don't have to say more," he murmured, but his voice held a quiet insistence. The kind born from years of coaxing stories from the broken. "But if those suits come back, or worse, you got people now. Us." She held his gaze, longer this time, the silence between them thickening with unspoken understanding. The door jingled then, pulling their attention. A lone trucker in flannel, nodding wearily as Millie poured his coffee. But Jax caught the flicker outside, the glint of headlights lingering too long in the lot before peeling away. Paranoia? Or the first thread of the net tightening? Elena crumpled the napkin, but not before writing one last line. "Stay a while." It was a plea, fragile as the steam curling from her cup, and Jax nodded, settling in as the night deepened. The rain started again, pattering against the roof like hesitant fingers, washing the world clean in fits and starts. He didn't know the suits had already called in reinforcements, or that Victor Hargrove's empire extended further than boardrooms, into shadows where loyalty was bought and silence enforced. But in that booth, with the scent of apple pie lingering and the hum of distant engines, Jax felt the pull of something deeper than club oaths. A shared fracture, mending in the quiet spaces words couldn't reach. Millie watched from the counter, her hand still on a rag, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time that day. The Reaper's code was simple: protect what mattered. But Jax was learning it anew, one napkin at a time. The road outside gleamed under the downpour, reflecting neon and stars, a path leading not just forward, but into the heart of what it meant to be unbroken. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The rain drummed harder against the diner's roof, a relentless rhythm that blurred the line between night and memory, turning the windows into smeared canvases of light and shadow. Jax sat across from Elena, the booth's vinyl worn smooth from years of weary confessions, the air between them thick with the scent of cooling pie and unspoken histories. Her last napkin lay folded on the table. Stay a while? A fragile bridge over the chasm of her silence. He nodded again, though she'd already turned her gaze to the rain-streaked glass, watching taillights fade into the downpour like retreating ghosts. Millie refilled his coffee without a word, the pot's steam mingling with the haze of cigarette smoke from the trucker at the counter, who hunched over his meal like a man carrying the weight of endless miles. Jack sipped slowly, the bitterness grounding him, as Elena's fingers traced invisible patterns on the tabletop. Circles, perhaps, or spirals leading nowhere. He wanted to ask about the worse she'd written, the jagged admission that hung heavier than the storm outside, but he knew better than to push. Silence had its own language, one he'd spoken fluently in the years after the war, when words felt like betrayals. "Tell you what," Jack said after a stretch, his voice low to match the rain's murmur. "Road's no good in this weather. Got a spare room at the clubhouse if you need it. Clean sheets, no questions." He kept it casual, like offering a light to a stranger, but his eyes held steady, conveying the offer's depth, the reaper's unspoken vow to shelter the storm-tossed without judgment. Elena's hand stilled, her breath visible in the chill seeping through the door. She reached for another napkin, the pen's scratch louder now, deliberate. "Why help? You don't know me." She slid it over, her knuckles white against the paper, as if bracing for rejection. Jax unfolded it, reading the words twice, the ink slightly smudged where her hand had trembled. He thought of Harlan's words in the garage, the old man's voice cutting through the doubt like a knife through fog. "World sees us as monsters." But here, in this booth, with the rain washing away the day's grime, he saw the truth in her question. The same doubt that had kept him riding alone, convinced his scars made him unfit for anything but the throttle. "Know enough," he replied, meeting her eyes. "Seen enough lost souls to know when one's callin' out. And the reapers. We don't turn away from that." She held his gaze, the flicker in her eyes deepening, a spark against the gathering dark. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the lot in stark white, revealing the black sedan Jax had glimpsed earlier, now parked at the edge, its engine idling like a predator's low growl. He tensed, his hand instinctively drifting toward the knife in his boot, but the car peeled away into the night, swallowed by the storm. Paranoia, maybe, or the first warning shot from Hargrove's world. Elena noticed his shift, her body coiling slightly, and she wrote quickly, "They're watching, always." The words were hurried, the lines uneven, betraying a fear that clawed deeper than surface scratches. Jax folded the napkin into his pocket, a talisman against whatever shadows pursued her. "Then we move smart," he said, standing slowly, offering his hand, not grabbing, just there, palm open like the road itself. "Come on, let me get you out of this rain." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the door, then back to him. The trucker glanced over, curiosity etching his weathered face. But he said nothing, turning back to his coffee as if such scenes were as common as the highway's hum. Elena took his hand, her grip light but trusting, her skin cool against his calluses. They stepped out into the deluge, the rain soaking through Jax's vest in seconds, plastering his hair to his forehead. He led her to his Harley, the bike gleaming wet under the diner's neon, and pulled a spare helmet from the saddlebag, faded black, lined with the faint scent of oil and old leather. She climbed on behind him without protest, her arms wrapping tentatively around his waist, the contact sending a jolt through him, not of spark, but of shared vulnerability. The engine roared to life, drowning the storm's fury, and they pulled onto Route 17, the headlights cutting a narrow path through sheets of water. Jax rode steady, the road slick but familiar, his mind racing ahead to the clubhouse. Ray's watchful eyes, Tommy's quiet strength, Maria's steady hands. Elena's hold tightened as they accelerated, her chin resting against his back, the warmth of her breath seeping through his shirt like a tentative thaw. The clubhouse loomed through the rain, a beacon of corrugated metal and floodlights. The Shadow Reaper's emblem, a stylized raven in flight, etched on the gate. Ray was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, a lantern casting his face in harsh relief. He nodded as Jax killed the engine, water dripping from the pipes in steady plinks. "Brought company," Ray observed, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing Elena as she dismounted, helmet in hand, her hoodie clinging like a second skin. "She's with us now," Jax said simply, the words carrying the weight of club law. Ray didn't question it. He stepped aside, holding the door as they entered the warmth of the main room. The air inside smelled of polished wood and faint cigar smoke, the walls lined with photos of rides past, grinning faces, endless horizons. Tommy looked up from a card game at the scarred oak table, his cards fanning out like forgotten promises, while Maria emerged from the back, a towel in hand. Elena froze in the doorway, the shift from storm to sanctuary overwhelming, her eyes wide as she took in the room, the easy camaraderie, the lack of judgment in their gazes. Jax guided her to a chair by the hearth, where a low fire crackled, embers glowing like buried embers of hope. Maria draped the towel over her shoulders without a word, her touch gentle, maternal in its quiet efficiency. "Dry off," she murmured. "You're safe here." As Elena rubbed the towel over her hair, droplets falling to the floor like unshed tears, Jax watched the tension in her shoulders ease, fraction by fraction. Ray poured her a mug of hot tea from the sideboard, the steam rising in lazy curls, and set it before her with a nod. No questions, no prying, just presence, the kind that filled voids words couldn't touch. She sipped slowly, her eyes meeting Jax's over the rim, gratitude flickering there, mingled with something rawer. Relief, perhaps, or the first stirrings of trust. But the peace shattered with a knock at the door, sharp, insistent, cutting through the fire's snap like a blade. Ray's hand went to the pistol at his belt, Tommy rising silently, his limp barely noticeable in the adrenaline surge. Jax stood, positioning himself between Elena and the entrance, his heart pounding a steady drum. Through the peephole he saw them, 3 men in dark coats, faces obscured by the rain. But their postures screamed authority, private security. Hargrove's hounds come to retrieve what they saw as lost property. "Open up!" one called, voice muffled but edged with command. "We know she's in there." Elena's mug trembled in her hands, tea sloshing over the edge, staining the wood like spilled secrets. Jax exchanged a glance with Ray, the Brotherhood's silent code igniting in that shared look. Protect the fragile, no matter the cost. The rain pounded on, indifferent, as the door rattled under another knock, the night closing in like a vice. In that moment, Jax realized his unthinkable act had only just begun. Not just stepping in at the diner, but drawing her into the Reaper's fold, where loyalty meant facing the storm head-on, together. The door rattled again under the force of the knock, a sharp demand that echoed through the clubhouse like a gunshot in the quiet. Jax's pulse thrummed in his ears, steady but insistent, the fire's crackle now a distant whisper against the storm's roar outside. Elena's mug slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor in a shatter of porcelain and steaming tea, the sound pulling every eye in the room. She shrank back in the chair, her towel-damp hair falling forward like a veil, her breath coming in shallow hitches that betrayed the fortress crumbling within. Ray moved first, his broad frame blocking the doorway, hand resting lightly on the pistol's grip. Not drawing, but ready, the metal glinting faintly in the lantern light. Tommy flanked him silently, his prosthetic leg steady on the worn floorboards, while Maria knelt by Elena, her hand gentle on the young woman's arm, a murmur of reassurance lost in the tension. Jax stepped forward, his boots heavy on the planks, the air thick with the scent of wet wool from the intruder's coat seeping through the cracks. He could feel the weight of the Reaper's gaze on him, their trust a silent anchor, pulling him from the isolation he'd worn like armor for too long. "State your business," Ray called through the door, his voice a low rumble that carried authority without rage, the kind honed from years of facing down threats with calm resolve. A muffled reply cut back, edged with impatience. "We're here for Elena Hargrove. Her father's concerned. Open up, or we make this official." The words hung heavy, laced with the implication of badges or worse. Hargrove's influence stretching like shadows into the night, buying compliance where fists or law couldn't. Jax glanced at Elena, her eyes wide and pleading, locked on his. In that moment, he saw the echo of his own past, the way Lena had looked at him after the funeral, small and silent, begging for a father who could fix the unfixable. He'd failed her then, choosing the road's solitude over the mess of grief. But here, with the rain lashing the windows like accusations, compassion stirred deeper, a quiet fire rekindling in his chest. This wasn't just club business. It was redemption's pull, the chance to stand where he'd once fled. "No one's leaving," Jax said, loud enough to carry, his tone even but unyielding, the gravel in his voice from too many dusty miles. He nodded to Ray, who cracked the door just enough to reveal the three men. Tall, suited despite the downpour, faces hardened by corporate loyalty, rain dripping from their hoods like melting resolve. The leader, broad-shouldered with a jaw set like concrete, met Jax's gaze through the gap, his eyes narrowing at the vest, the patch. "This is private property," Ray added, filling the frame, his presence a wall of muscle and memory. "You got a warrant? Or just Daddy's checkbook?" The man's lip curled, but he didn't push, glancing past Ray to scan the room. Elena huddled by the fire, the scattered cards on the table, the photos of rides and reunions on the walls. "She's a minor in her father's eyes, unstable. We can call the sheriff, make this messy for all of you." Tommy shifted, his hand on a nearby cue stick. Not a weapon, but a reminder of the clubhouse's unpolished edges. Maria rose slowly, her medic's calm masking the steel beneath, positioning herself protectively near Elena. The young woman clutched the arms of the chair, knuckles pale, but her silence held now, fortified by the circle around her. The Reaper's quiet vigil, a shield against the world's judgment. Jax felt the moral knot tighten in his gut, the decision hanging like the storm clouds outside. Back down, and let the suits drag her into whatever gilded cage awaited, or draw the line, risking the club's fragile peace for a stranger's fragile trust. He'd ridden alone too long, convincing himself compassion was a luxury for the unbroken, but Elena's plea from the napkin echoed, "Stay a while?" A thread pulling him toward something human, something worth the fray. "She's chosen her spot," Jax said, stepping beside Ray, his shadow merging with the sergeant's. "And we're her company now. Tell Hargrove to come himself if he wants words. But you, turn around. Road's that way." The leader's eyes flicked to Elena again, a flicker of calculation crossing his face. The cost of escalation. The Reaper's reputation as more than just leather and engines. A brotherhood that fixed overlooked fractures with hands calloused from loyalty. He hesitated, rain pooling at his feet, the downpour muffling the distant thunder. Then, with a curt nod to his men, he backed off the porch, their footsteps squelching into the mud as they retreated to their vehicles, two sleek SUVs idling like beasts in the dark. The door shut with a solid thud, the bolt sliding home, and the room exhaled collectively, the fire popping louder in the sudden quiet. Ray turned, clapping Jax on the shoulder, his grip firm with unspoken approval. "That was drawing a line in the sand, brother. Hope you're ready for the tide." Jax nodded, the adrenaline ebbing into a weary resolve, his eyes finding Elena's. She rose unsteadily, towel slipping to the floor, and crossed the room in 3 tentative steps. Her hand found his arm, light as a breath, and for the first time, her lips moved. Not in speech, but in a shape that might have been, "Thank you," the ghost of sound behind it. Tears tracked down her cheeks, mingling with the rain's remnants, and Jax covered her hand with his, rough palm against soft skin, the contact a bridge over their shared silences. Maria fetched a blanket, draping it around Elena's shoulders, while Tommy stoked the fire, embers flaring brighter. Harlan shuffled in from the back, his tremor steadied by the moment's gravity, and poured a round of water. No whiskey tonight, just clarity. They sat together then, the circle tightening around the hearth, stories murmuring low. Ray recounting a run-in with corporate types years back. Tommy sharing how silence had been his armor after the blast. Maria's quiet tales of mending the unseen wounds. Elena listened, her body relaxing inch by inch, the fortress yielding to the warmth of voices that judged not by wealth or words, but by the heart beneath. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle, the night air carrying the faint scent of wet pine from the woods beyond. Jax watched Elena's eyelids grow heavy, her head nodding against the chair's back, and felt the evolution stir within him. From the lone rider who'd buried his regrets under miles, to this, a man choosing compassion's risk, the Brotherhood's loyalty weaving him back into the fold. But as the fire died to coals, a low rumble approached. Not thunder, but engines, multiple and purposeful. Hargrove's reinforcements, or rivals drawn by the scent of conflict. The moral suspense coiled tighter, the quiet justice of the Reapers tested in the gathering dark, where protection meant more than standing ground. It meant facing the dawn unbroken. The low rumble grew into a growl, vibrating through the clubhouse walls like the earth's own warning, pulling Jax from the hearth's dying glow. Elena stirred in her chair, eyes snapping open, the fragile peace shattering as her body tensed, hands clutching the blanket's edges like a lifeline. The fire's embers cast flickering shadows across the room, turning familiar faces into silhouettes of resolve. Ray by the door, pistol now drawn and low. Tommy rising with a quiet efficiency, grabbing a shotgun from the rack. Maria guiding Elena behind the bar, her medics calm, a steady anchor in the rising storm. Harlan, seated in the corner, gripped his cane, his tremor forgotten in the surge of old instincts. Jax moved to the window, peering through the rain-smeared glass, the floodlights outside cutting harsh beams into the drizzle. 3 motorcycles crested the rise, their headlights slicing the night. Not sleek cruisers, but rugged dirt bikes. Riders hunched low in black leathers. No patches visible, but an air of menace that set Jax's teeth on edge. Not Hargrove's suits. These were rougher, locals or worse, the kind who haunted backroads for easy marks. Whispers from the garage earlier that day echoed in his mind. Rumors of a rival crew, the Dust Vipers, sniffing around Reaper territory, drawn by the scent of vulnerability after a botched run last month. Had word of the club's new guest spread already? Bait for opportunists? Stay low, Jax murmured to the room, his voice a gravel whisper honed from foxholes and midnight watches. He felt the pull of isolation tugging at him, the old urge to ride solo and let the chips fall. But Elena's gaze found his from behind the bar, wide and trusting, rooting him in place. This was no longer just his burden. The Reaper's code bound them, a web of loyalty that turned strangers into family, one shared stand at a time. The bikes pulled up short of the gate, engines idling with throaty menace, exhaust fumes mingling with the wet pine scent drifting in. The lead rider killed his motor, dismounting with a swagger that screamed challenge, his face obscured by a half-helmet and the night's gloom. "Heard you got company, Reapers," he called, voice carrying over the drizzle like a taunt. "Fancy kind. Hargrove's lost lamb? We can make this easy. Hand her over and we all walk away with smiles." Ray cracked the door, shotgun leveled at hip height, the barrel a dark promise in the light. "This ain't your road, Viper. Turn those hogs around before we make it permanent." The name hung unspoken but understood. These weren't random drifters. The Dust Vipers preyed on the weak, shaking down truck stops in small towns, their moral compass bent toward profit over protection. Jax's hand went to the doorframe, knuckles whitening, the rain's patter now a tense underscore to the standoff. From the shadows, Elena's breath hitched, a soft sound that pierced Jax like shrapnel. He glanced back, seeing the fear etch deeper lines on her face, her fingers twisting the blanket into knots. In that instant, the moral coil tightened. Back down and risk her silence swallowing her whole, or escalate, drawing blood where compassion demanded restraint. The Brotherhood had taught him justice wasn't always loud thunder. Sometimes it was the quiet stand, the line drawn in mud and resolve. The Viper leader laughed, a bark that echoed off the metal roof, stepping closer to the gate, his two shadows flanking him with chains dangling from belts like serpents. World thinks you're heroes, patching up strays. But we know better. Leather hides the same rot. Girl's worth a bounty to the right buyer. Step aside, old man. Jax pushed past Ray, the door swinging wide, cool mist kissing his skin as he stepped onto the porch. The drizzle beaded on his vest, tracing paths down the Shadow Reaper's patch like tears unshed. You heard him, Jax said, his tone low and even, carrying the weight of engines long silenced. Ride out, or find out why they call us Reapers. His stance was open, non-threatening, but his eyes held the storm's edge, the contained rage of a veteran who'd buried too many brothers to flinch at shadows. The leader paused, sizing him up, the gray in Jax's beard, the steady hands that had wrenched engines and lives back from the brink. Behind Jax, the door creaked as Tommy and Ray emerged, weapons casual but unmistakable, the club's unity a visible force. Harlan's voice rasped from inside, faint but piercing. Ain't no price on a soul, boy. That's the rot talkin'. Even Maria's silhouette appeared, a tire iron in hand, her compassion tempered with the steel of survival. Tension hung thick as the mist, the Viper's bikes ticking as they cooled, a countdown to fracture. Elena's presence weighed on Jax, her silence a plea that echoed his own regrets. The daughter he'd lost to distance, the second chances he'd ridden past. But here, in the rain's hush, compassion surged, raw and unyielding, pushing him to protect not just her, but the fragile humanity the world mocked in men like them. The leader spat into the mud, eyes flicking to the clubhouse windows where Elena's shadow flickered. This ain't over, Reaper. Hargrove's got deeper pockets than your little club. He mounted up, the engines roaring back to life, a retreating thunder that faded into the woods. The gate rattled as they gunned away, taillights swallowed by the dark, leaving only the drip of rain and the scent of burnt rubber. Jax exhaled, the porch creaking under his boots as he turned back inside. The room settled, breaths releasing like steam from cooling pipes. Elena emerged from behind the bar, her steps tentative, blanket trailing like a cape. She reached for a notepad on the table, left from club notes, and scribbled quickly, sliding it to Jax. They came for me? Because of you? Her handwriting trembled, but her eyes held steady, a spark of something new igniting. Not fear alone, but the stirrings of voice, born from the stand they'd just made. He shook his head, folding the paper gently. Because of us, and that's how it stays. The fire needed stoking, but the warmth in the room came from elsewhere. The nods from Ray, Tommy's quiet grin, Maria's hand on Elena's shoulder. Jax felt the shift within, isolation cracking under the weight of shared purpose, redemption weaving through the Brotherhood's threads. Outside, the drizzle persisted, washing the night clean, but the rumble's echo lingered, a promise that the real storm brewed deeper, where Hargrove's shadows and Elena's buried truths waited to collide. In the quiet that followed, Jax poured water for them all, the simple act a vow. They would face it unbroken, hearts beating against the leather. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena reach more people who still believe in humanity. The clubhouse settled into an uneasy hush after the Viper's engines faded. The rain's soft patter on the tin roof, the only sound threading through the dim room like a fragile truce. Jack stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass in slow clouds, watching the taillights vanish into the tree line, until only the mist remained, curling around the floodlights like hesitant fingers. His hands, still steady from the standoff, now clenched at his sides, the adrenaline leaching away to leave a hollow ache in his chest. A reminder of nights in Nam, when the quiet after gunfire felt more treacherous than the blasts. Elena hovered near the hearth, the blanket draped loose over her shoulders, her eyes tracing the embers as if they held answers to the shadows chasing her. Ray holstered his pistol with a soft click, breaking the silence, his broad frame easing back into a chair with a creak of wood protesting age. That was a probe, Jax. Vipers don't ride blind. Someone tipped him. Hargrove's playing chess, using scum like that to test our edges. His voice was low, laced with the gravel of shared battles, but his gaze softened as it landed on Elena, acknowledging her place in the fray without a word of blame. Tommy nodded from across the table, wiping down the shotgun with a rag, his movements methodical, the faint click of his prosthetic a quiet rhythm against the floor. They'll circle back, but we hold the line. Always have. Maria rose from her spot by Elena, fetching a broom to sweep the shattered mug's remnants, the porcelain shards glinting like broken promises in the firelight. She worked without hurry, her presence a balm, the scent of chamomile tea from earlier still lingering on her clothes. Elena watched her, then shifted closer to Jax, her bare feet silent on the cool planks. She pulled a fresh notepad from the sideboard, club stationery, edges frayed from inventory lists, and scribbled, the pen's scratch a hesitant whisper in the room. Why me? You risk everything. She tore the page free, folding it once before pressing it into his palm, her touch lingering a beat too long, warm against the chill seeping from outside. Jax unfolded it under the lantern's glow, the words blurring slightly in the flicker. He met her eyes, seeing the storm there. Fear mingled with a dawning curiosity, the first cracks in her silence widening under the Reaper's unyielding shelter. Because someone has to, he said softly, his voice roughened by the night's toll, echoing the moral crossroads that had defined his rides. Turn away from the wreckage, or pull over and mend what you could. He'd chosen solitude after Lena, letting the road swallow his regrets. But Elena's plea tugged at the frayed threads of that isolation, weaving him back toward the light of connection. World's quick to label us, bikers, outcasts, but we've all got breaks that don't show. Yours. It's calling louder than most. She bit her lip, a small gesture that caught the fire's reflection, turning her eyes to liquid amber. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of untold stories, the air heavy with the faint tang of gun oil and damp leather. Harlan cleared his throat from his corner, his cane tapping once like a punctuation. Reminds me of 82, he rasped, voice thin but steady, drawing the circle tighter. Pulled a kid from a wreck on 66, silent as her after his folks went down in flames. Doc said he'd never speak. We didn't push, just rode with him, let the engines do the talking. Boy found his voice on a Harley, miles from nowhere. His eyes, faded but sharp, held Elena's, a quiet invitation to the Brotherhood's hidden grace. Elena nodded faintly, her shoulders easing as she sank into a chair beside Jax, the notepad balanced on her knee. Outside, the drizzle thickened, drumming a steady cadence that muffled the world's intrusions. But Jax caught the distant crunch of tires on gravel. Slow, deliberate, not the Viper's reckless growl. He tensed, hand drifting to his belt, but Ray was already at the peephole, his frame silhouetted against the door. Sedan, black, Hargrove's mark, saw the plates earlier. The words hung like smoke, the moral suspense coiling anew. Confrontation at the gate? Or evasion into the night, risking Elena's fragile thaw? Before Jax could respond, Elena's pen flew across the page, urgent lines forming. Don't let him in. He knows what happened. She thrust it toward him, her hand trembling now. Not from cold, but from the raw edge of memory surfacing. her breath quickening in shallow bursts. Jax read it, the implication sinking like lead, what happened, carrying the weight of secrets buried under headlines of accidents and breakdowns. He thought of the papers Ray had mentioned, the sanitized crash report that masked deeper fractures, a family unraveling in wealth's cold grip, where silence was survival. The knock came then, polite, almost genteel, a stark contrast to the Viper's brute force. "Mr. Harlan?" a voice called, smooth and measured, laced with boardroom polish. "Victor Hargrove. I'd like to speak with my daughter. Peacefully." The name alone stirred the room, Harlan's cane tapping sharper, Tommy's rag pausing mid-swipe. Jax felt the pull of compassion warring with caution, Elena's note burning in his fist. This was the man who'd built empires on overlooked lives, yet couldn't mend his own, a mirror to Jax's failures with Lena, the distance he'd let grow into a chasm. Ray cracked the door, chain still latched, rain misting in. Hargrove stood there, umbrella shielding a tailored coat, face lined with the weariness of power unchecked. Mid-50s, silver hair slicked back, eyes sharp, but shadowed by something akin to regret. Flanked by two discreet guards, he raised a hand in placation. "No trouble, just... Elena's been gone too long. The accident. It changed her. I want her home, where she can heal." Elena rose, crossing to the door in a blur of motion, her blanket falling forgotten. She pressed close to the frame, peering through the gap, her face inches from her father's. For a heartbeat, the air stilled, the rain's drum a distant hum. Then, her lips parted and a sound escaped. Not words, but a soft, broken exhale, raw with the grief of unspoken accusations. Hargrove's eyes widened, umbrella dipping as rain traced his cheek. "Elena," he whispered, voice cracking, the billionaire's armor fracturing in the porch light. Jax stepped up, hand on her shoulder, grounding her as the emotional turn crested. A small act of presence, unlocking what money and therapy couldn't. She shook her head, tears spilling silent, and grabbed the notepad from the floor, scrawling in frantic strokes. "You broke me, not the crash." She held it up to the crack, the ink bleeding slightly from her grip's force, the revelation hanging there like a verdict. The accident no mere misfortune, but a collision of family secrets. A father's neglect veiled in luxury, pushing her into silence's depths. Hargrove recoiled, face paling under the mist, the guards shifting uneasily. "That's not... Elena, please, come home. We can fix this." But his words rang hollow, the plea of a man accustomed to buying resolutions, blind to the humanity he'd overlooked. Jax closed the door gently but firmly, the latch clicking like finality. Elena turned into his chest, her body shaking with muffled sobs, the first breach in her fortress. The Reapers gathered closer, Ray's hand on Jax's back, Maria's quiet murmur of comfort, the community weaving around her like threads of quiet justice. Outside, Hargrove's sedan idled a moment longer, then crunched away into the night, the rain swallowing its retreat. In the hearth's glow, Elena pulled back, wiping her face, her eyes meeting Jax's with a clarity born of release. She mouthed the words this time, lips forming them deliberately. "Thank you." No sound yet, but the promise of it lingered, a spark against the dark. Jax nodded, the weight in his chest shifting, from isolation's burden to the warmth of redemption's first light. The storm outside eased, stars piercing the clouds, but the true tension brewed within. Elena's voice on the cusp, Hargrove's shadows lengthening, the unthinkable act unfolding in whispers and stands that redefined them all. The clubhouse air hung thick with the aftermath of Hargrove's retreat, the rain's final patter fading into a hush that amplified every creak and sigh. Jax guided Elena back to the hearth, her body still trembling against his side, the notepad clutched like a shield in her white-knuckled grip. The embers glowed low, casting a ruddy light across the faces of the reapers. Ray's jaw set in quiet vigilance, Tommy's hand still on the shotgun's stock, Maria's eyes soft with the unspoken ache of a healer witnessing fracture. Harlan sat unmoving in his corner, Kane propped like a sentinel, his faded gaze fixed on Elena, as if measuring the depth of her storm. She sank into the chair, the blanket pooling around her like discarded armor, and stared at the scrawled words on the page. "You broke me, not the crash." The ink stared back, accusatory and raw, a confession she'd carried in silence for months, now laid bare in the sanctuary of strangers. Jax knelt before her, his knees protesting the damp floorboards, and took the notepad gently from her hands. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," he said, his voice a low rumble, threaded with the gravel of roads traveled and regrets unearthed. His own eyes burned, the parallel to Lena sharpening like a blade. The daughter who'd stopped speaking to him, not from trauma, but from the slow erosion of absence, his choices carving silences wider than any accident. Elena's breath hitched, a sound like wind through cracked leather, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist where the old tattoo peaked. A phoenix rising from ash, inked in a Saigon back alley after the jungle claimed too many. The touch lingered, tentative, pulling a memory from Jax unbidden. The night Lena, at 16, had traced that same ink with curious fingers, asking about the fire that birthed it. He'd brushed her off then, the road calling louder than her questions, leaving her to build walls he couldn't scale. Now, with Elena's gaze mirroring that lost curiosity, compassion flooded him, warm and unrelenting, dissolving the isolation he'd armored himself in for years. Ray cleared his throat, breaking the spell, and poured fresh water into tin mugs from the sideboard, the liquid glugging softly in the quiet. "Hargrove won't slink away quiet," he warned, handing one to Jax. His grip on the mug steady despite the night's toll. "Man like that buys his peace, but we don't sell ours." Tommy nodded, setting the shotgun aside with a soft clunk, his prosthetic leg shifting as he pulled up a stool. "Seen his type in the sandbox. Command from afar. Never get dirty. But you." He trailed off, glancing at Elena, respect etching his young face. "You faced him down. That's more than most." Maria knelt beside her, a damp cloth in hand, dabbing at the tear-streaked cheeks with maternal care. "The crash," she murmured, voice soft as the fire's dying crackle. It wasn't just metal and speed, was it? Words unsaid twist deeper than wreckage. Elena's eyes met hers, widening slightly, the fortress yielding further under the weight of understanding eyes. No judgment, only the quiet empathy of those who'd mended their own hidden breaks. Outside, the night deepened, stars emerging through thinning clouds like hesitant witnesses, the gravel lot glistening under the floodlights. Jax felt the rising tension coil in his gut, a premonition of escalation. Hargrove's empire wouldn't bend to a door slammed in its face. He'd ride out at dawn, scout the roads, ensure the Viper's probe hadn't drawn more shadows. But for now, in this circle of worn chairs and flickering light, the Brotherhood held vigil, their presence a balm against the encroaching dark. Elena stirred, pulling the blanket tighter, and reached for the notepad again. Her hand shook less now, the pen moving with deliberate strokes. "The crash was his fault. Pushed me to drive after the fight. Said I was weak, like Mom." She paused, the words hanging unfinished, then added, "She left because of him. I stopped talking so he couldn't hurt me more." The page trembled as she slid it forward, the late revelation unfolding like a wound lanced clean. Not a random tragedy, but a family's quiet implosion, Victor's control fracturing lives under the gloss of wealth, Elena's silence a shield forged in betrayal. Jax read it, the air thickening with the scent of cooling embers and unspoken grief, his throat closing around the echo of his own failures. "I know that fight," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. the emotional turn cresting as he set the page down. Pushed my girl away same way. Chose the throttle over her tears. Thought strength was riding alone. But it's this. He gestured to the room, the Reapers leaning in, their nods a chorus of shared scars. Standing when it counts, protecting what's real. Elena's lips parted, a soft inhale escaping, and then, impossibly, in the hush, the word formed, faint as mist but undeniable. Real. It hung there, a single syllable breaking free, her voice raw and unpracticed, cracking on the edges like gravel under tires. The room stilled, breaths held, as tears spilled anew, not from pain but release. Jax's hand found hers, squeezing gently, the unthinkable act complete. Not a grand gesture, but the steady anchor of loyalty that coaxed her voice from the depths, the brotherhood's compassion proving stronger than silence's chains. Ray's eyes glistened, a rare crack in his stoic facade, while Tommy's grin broke wide, Maria's hand covering her mouth in quiet awe. Harlan nodded slowly, his tremor easing as if the word had steadied him too. Elena spoke again, stronger now. Thank you. The words tumbled out, halting but alive, the moral suspense resolving in a flood of human connection, redemption blooming in the spaces between breaths. As dawn crept in, painting the windows with pale light, they sat through the night, Elena's voice weaving halting stories of arguments and escapes, the Reapers listening without interruption, their circle a testament to justice beyond law, quiet, unyielding. Jax felt the evolution settle in his bones, from the isolated rider haunted by what-ifs, to this redeemed man, family reforged in compassion's fire. Hargrove's shadows might return, but they'd face them unbroken, voices raised where silence once reigned. The first light touched the lot, engines humming faintly in the distance, a reminder that roads led onward. In that glow, Elena's hand stayed in Jax's, a silent vow etched in the dawn. Strength wasn't leather or speed, but the courage to mend what the world deemed irreparable. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of She's Not Broken. See you in the next one.